In South Wales, I've been to Pontypool and done a candidate launch there. I've been to Ebbw Vale, out meeting shoppers and shopkeepers. I've been to Blackwood, done a walkabout. I'm now in Newport, so I am getting out and about round the country. And you know, very interesting. We launched the Brexit Party, and within a couple of weeks, the thing had simply taken off in Wales, and particularly in the valleys, particularly in the old traditional Labour seats. I wonder what Keir Hardie and Nye Bevan would make of it today, although of course they both would be leavers because they actually were very patriotic and believed in the country and believed in our people. I'm very struck, not just by what happened to us in the European elections here where we topped the poll. I'm also very struck at just how remote the London Labour Party is from its real homeland here in the valleys of South Wales. You see, the Labour Party today is more about Islington than it is Isloyn, where I was, Blackwood being part of that constituency this afternoon. And lots of stories about corruption at local government level, lots of feeling that the London Labour Party is a million miles away from South Wales. And remember, you've got constituencies here that voted leave, all being represented by Remainer MPs, and a Labour Party who were fighting this election saying you must have a second referendum because you didn't know what you were voting for. You weren't really clever enough, were you, to make the right decision. And a second referendum in which the choice is going to be Remain versus a form of Remain. So I have to say there's considerable anger here in the Labour valleys. Now, in the old days, they literally used to weigh the vote for Labour in these constituencies. But I want to make this point. You've been hearing stories that I might split the vote. Well, let me put this back to Boris. If you put up Conservative candidates in constituencies here that since 1918 have returned Labour MPs every single time, you in effect will split our vote because we are the challenger against these Labour candidates. So this whole argument about splitting the vote actually cuts both ways. Corbyn himself, I have to say, is very unpopular here because actually what you find here is people are very patriotic, believers in Wales, believers in being part of the United Kingdom. Patriotic old Labour does not like Jeremy Corbyn one little bit. So that's been my day here, and we've got an event starting in about an hour's time here in Newport, and I'm going to come back to South Wales more than once over the course of the next few weeks. What else has been going on? Well, Boris Johnson yesterday was in Northern Ireland, and I don't think he thought that he was being videoed, but he was. And he told the business group two things. Firstly, he repeated the nonsense that given his deal, that exporters from Northern Ireland will be able to sell their goods into the UK without any red tape. Not true. Stephen Barclay confirmed they would have to sign export declaration forms because we physically put a border down the Irish Sea. Extraordinary in itself. But this afternoon, Michael Gove had to confirm that the Prime Minister got it wrong last night and that there would be some red tape for Northern Ireland selling into the rest of the United Kingdom. He also told these business people, well, you should be very happy. You've got free movement of people. You'll stay part of the customs union and part of single market rules, as if somehow that was a benefit. This from the Prime Minister, who apparently, supposedly, is pushing Brexit. And when I see what Boris had to say last night, and when I think about the answer he gave to Owen Paterson, when Paterson said, do we get back control of our fisheries? He said, yes, 100%. I was struck. He clearly hadn't read Clause 72 of the political declaration as part of his own withdrawal agreement. So my conclusion to all of this is, Boris, it would be quite wrong for you to win a general election to give us a Boris Brexit if first the country didn't know what was actually in it. We do need to debate this. And all the while he's going around factories being photographed, drinking whiskey or examining textile wear. He's not actually taking any questions, any real questions from members of the public. There's no real debate. And I challenge you, Boris, come on, let's have a debate. Let's talk about what you call your Great New Deal and what I call Theresa May's bad old treaty. Jean-Claude Juncker, love him or hate him, when he says this is the same deal as Theresa May's, I tend to believe Juncker, in this case, more than I do the British Prime Minister. So come on, Boris, let's have a debate. Now, part of this programme, of course, and we're going out, as you know, we're going out on YouTube, we're going out on Twitter, we're going out on Facebook, is I want your interaction with me. And I have got a lot of it. Now, Daniel asks me on Facebook, when do you rest? Daniel, I haven't got time for that sort of thing. No, it is a pretty intense time. But I guess I've always pushed hard for this because I believe in it with all my heart and soul. I do believe that we ought to be a self-governing nation. I do think the whole EU project is a disaster. So rather like the Duke of Edinburgh once said, I'll rest when I am dead. Now, I get this very interesting one from Joanne on Facebook who says, Nigel, go and sort out Pontefract. Yvette Cooper needs to go. Joanne, I am going to Pontefract on this tour, don't you worry. And for those that don't know, Pontefract, 71% leave vote, represented by Yvette Cooper, who promised to respect the result of the referendum and has done everything she can, used every trick in the book, working with that Burko man who mercifully is gone, to stop Brexit from happening. Gary says, Nigel, you've got to be on the TV debates. Well, I have been invited today to take part in one of the TV debates, so I suppose that is at least a little bit of progress. Now, I'm also asked here on YouTube, I'm asked by James a question that really matters. Please can you talk about the EU Defence Union? So overnight, President Macron has said, we can't rely on the Americans anymore. Trump is unreliable. We have to build our European army. And this is all wrong. I know Trump, he does not want to abandon NATO at all. What he says is all the members should obey the rules and pay their 2% contribution. At the moment, of the 28 members, over 20 are not paying the 2%. They're not spending 2% on defence. And Trump, in my view, quite rightly is saying, come on, whether you're small or big, 2% is a reasonable number to spend on defence. But you can see with Macron, you can see with that lovely man Verhofstadt, you can see with all of them, any excuse to get rid of America and to build their own Walter Mitty European army. I'm also asked on YouTube, Andy asks me, how about Anne Widdecombe for PM? Well, Andy, you are in luck, because joining me on the road here in Newport is Anne Widdecombe. Anne, welcome to On the Road.
Thank you very much.
And as our viewers can see, we are literally
on
right next to the M4.
We are.
And we're on the road. Now, I don't think many people will know this story, but it was Easter Saturday.
Yes.
And I was in the office trying to get a list together for the European elections, and the phone rang from, I think, the Norwegian fjords.
Flam. From Flam.
From
in
Flam.
Yes.
Okay, no flim flam here, but and Anne, you rang me, and well, tell me what you said.
Well, I rang you and I said I'd like to join the Brexit Party, and then I said, and I'd like to stand as an MEP, and I didn't know what you were going to say. There was a short silence. I think you were a little bit surprised.
Well, I was stunned, to be honest with you. Because I associate you with the Conservative Party. I associate you with being a minister, but more than that, I associate you as somebody standing up for what I would have believed over my life to be conservative values, socially, economically, politically. And I think I'm right in saying you were a member of the party for
55 years.
Please, you said it, not
I joined
me.
at 16.
You were very young when you joined. But, that was for you a huge decision. What drove you to it?
It was an absolutely massive decision. I've always said I stood by a fjord, but I crossed a Rubicon. It was that big a decision. And I had been growing steadily disillusioned. I mean, I had lots of differences with the Conservative Party, but one generally swallows that because we live in a two-party system, and it's one or the other. But I was just so frustrated and disbelieving, quite honestly, at what Theresa May was doing. And I remember the point when I knew that I was going to leave the Conservative Party for good, probably. And that was when, effectively, either she lied or she didn't understand her own deal, because she assured the House that the backstop did not mean being trapped in the customs union. She produced advice from the Attorney General, which allegedly upheld this. And then when Parliament said, hang on, this is only part of his advice, where's the rest? And when they forced the government to publish the rest, he had said the exact opposite.
Yes, I remember that very well.
And that I think was my ultimate moment of complete disillusionment.
And is that because somehow that bond of trust that needs to exist between the people and those that govern them had began to break?
Oh, I mean, the Parliament that I'm looking at now, it's not the sort of Parliament that I belong to. I mean, we had our faults and members misbehaved and things went wrong. I mean, all that is quite true, but nevertheless, it was a very different sort of Parliament. I mean, for a start, lying to the House of Commons was the sin against the Holy Ghost, quite honestly. It was something you could not do and be forgiven. Now they do it all the time. They just stand there and lie. And it's become the norm.
Now, Mrs May's deal, you know, and your views on that very clear, and that's predominantly why you rang me, that and the breach of trust. And yet, into this, we get the Brexit Party storming the European elections, Mrs May resigning before the results came through, and maybe not surprising because they got 8.8%, their lowest result in 200 years.
Which they deserved.
And which they deserve. I absolutely agree with that entirely. And into this bounds, like a Labrador, Boris Johnson. And, you know, let's be honest, I mean, you know him, he can be very entertaining and very amusing, and he's no stupid, he's no fool. What do you make of Boris's deal?
Well, you know, I remember once chairing a committee at which Boris was speaking, and he was entertaining the committee. But he wasn't actually discussing the subject at hand. He wasn't discussing any clauses, but he just was entertaining the committee, and I stopped him because he was out of order. And the committee was actually quite cross because it was enjoying the entertainment. And I think Boris's single biggest strength is that personality. But of course, then you've got to ask, you know, he has got a formidable brain. Does he apply it? Has he read this deal?
Well, this is my question.
Has he read it?
This is why I want to challenge him to a debate, because he clearly makes factual errors when he's discussing it.
So either he doesn't understand his own treaty, and it is a treaty, or he's deliberately falsifying the interpretation. Well, I think we should know which it is.
But he does have potentially one thing going for him, doesn't he? And I think we have to admit this, sitting here this evening. The level of Brexit fatigue in the country, the level of, I think, well, disenchantment, perhaps bordering on disgust with Parliament, the way the whole thing's operated. When he says, let's get Brexit done, it's quite tempting, isn't it?
Oh, it's very tempting. I mean, the public is thoroughly fed up. They want Brexit off the agenda and get back to normal politics. You know, we've still got a health service and an education service, neither of which are performing wonderfully. And therefore people do want to get back to normal politics. And I understand that.
Yeah.
I really understand that. But this is where we have to keep our eye on the main objective. And what Boris is offering is not Brexit. I mean, it really isn't. And in 2 to 3 years' time, the people who are now saying, just get it done, they will be being told by the politicians of the day, we can't do this, we can't do that because of EU rules. And they're going to be scratching their heads and they're going to be thinking, but hang on, we've left. That's when they'll find out.
I don't think it'll take 2 or 3 years, because if Boris does win a majority and does ratify this treaty and sign up to the terms of the political declaration, and what you're talking about here is the regulatory alignment to find that, you know, we're not making our own rules. I think within 6 or 9 months they'll be absolutely furious. I don't think people fully realise that what Boris is actually going to do is take us into 3 more years of negotiations.
No, I'm sure they don't realise that. They don't realise that the bill for leaving is going to increase. They don't realise that we really can't set up trade deals if we've got to stay on this level playing field, which is required. That is quite impossible. I mean, it is remaining in all but name. And it is remaining, of course, without any influence on future policy. None at all.
No, it's a Remainers Brexit. I think we can.
It's a Remainers
You
Brexit.
and I agree on
Yeah.
that. Now, Anne, tell me, you did politics for a very, very long time. You got out, and I think people will be fascinated. I mean, what on earth made you do Strictly Come Dancing?
Oh, Strictly had come to me every single year. They came to me from 2004 until 2009. Every year, without fail, they came.
Yeah.
And every year, without fail, I said to them, no, go away. But then two things happened. The first was, Nigel, I saw John Sargent doing it.
Yes.
And I thought, oh, you don't have to be able to dance. And the second, the much more important factor was I retired. So quite suddenly, I no longer owed anybody any duty of time or dignity. So I thought, well, I will now. I can. There's no good reason why I shouldn't. I'll do it this year. Well, in the very first 2 hours of the very first morning's training, Anton said to me, I think the less time you spend with your feet on the floor, the better. And that is why we spent 10 weeks flying, lifting, spinning, dragging, anything. Yeah.
Well, it made you, I mean, much more than being a politician, it made you a household name. I was watching today in Ebbw Vale.
Yes.
As we walked up the high street, and there were a group of 20s, 30s
Yeah.
women, and it was hairdressers, and they all came out and wanted selfies with you. And they would never have done that without Whittaker the politician, would they?
No, I think that was quite true. I think Strictly altered my image. I didn't change. I mean, as I said to everybody, it would have been deeply inappropriate to display those qualities at the dispatch box. Something else was required in Parliament.
Yeah.
So I didn't change, but people were able to see another side of me they hadn't seen before.
No, well, they certainly did that. And you moved from being a political figure into being a celebrity figure. When you think about your life in current affairs, and not just Brexit, but the shape of our society today, do you feel optimistic about our next 10 or 20 years, or do you feel very worried about it?
I think one can always feel optimistic. I mean, I think back 20 years, and there were things that were much better than they are now, but there were also things that were much worse. The state of medicine, for example. We now have cures that we wouldn't have had 20 years ago. So there's always something, but on the other hand, family stability has completely evaporated, whereas in the 50s it was extremely strong. So the past and the future always have good points and bad points, but if you look at the political picture and you look at Parliament, I am not optimistic, quite honestly, and the rot began when we started having quotas instead of going strictly on merit and everybody had to beat off the competition on an equal basis. We started to have quotas because we wanted a more diverse Parliament. Well, that's absolutely fine. By all means, aim for a more diverse Parliament, but go out and find the meritorious candidates. Don't just push others aside for them, which is what is happening.
Who's the best person you've met in politics? The most honest and best person you've met in politics?
Well, actually, a lot of people will be surprised that I say this, but actually it was Ken Clarke. Because Ken never concealed what he thought about Europe.
No,
he
I
never
agree.
concealed what he thought about Europe.
And he's totally charming.
Oh, he's very charming.
And he's
fun.
and he's
fun.
rounded. He's got his
You can
jazz.
have a drink with him. Yeah.
I have done, yes. I had a cigar with him as well.
Yeah.
And who was the biggest disappointment in your political career?
Theresa May, without a doubt. I thought she was inadequate. I didn't think that she was duplicitous.
Well, folks, that was pretty much. I mean, I could rebrand this now and call it Straight Talking with Anne Widdicombe. Anne, thanks for joining us. Thank you. I am going to be back in London this weekend. I will be on Monday broadcasting on the road from Hartlepool, where Richard Tice is standing for the Brexit Party. Have a great weekend.